Early Saturday morning, I had just dropped off my wife, Elsbeth Tipton, at the airport. It was a bright, beautiful day, and this caused my thoughts to wander from subject to subject, rather than being focused as usual. The thing that occupied most of my gray matter was Elsbeth. She recently turned 40, I, Blake Tipton, am only 35, and it seemed to have a deeper impact on her than I realized. Turning 40 was obviously a big milestone for her, but she didn't seem to enjoy the 40th birthday party I threw in her honor. Her 40th birthday meant nothing to me except for future children. I'll get to that later. I truly believe that age is just a number. Probably, if I had thought differently 10 years ago, I would not have married a woman 5 years older than me, but this did not bother me in the least. Elspeth had gone to visit her two sisters and their families, who lived more than 700 miles away. She said she needed a week after the birthday party I threw for her to clear her head. "Honey, not only am I turning 40, she told me a few days ago, but I need to reconsider my goals in my professional life, and I really miss Eleanor and Eva and their families." I had no problems with this trip and did everything in my power to make it easier. I was a little concerned when she was pensive for a few days between buying plane tickets and me dropping her off at the airport, and was even more concerned when she looked like a blow-up doll in bed last night, rather than a wild one. Cat, as she usually is, but chalked it up to stress. My mind was also preoccupied with some of the minor weight loss that Elsbeth had experienced over the past few months. This was not a sign of a serious illness, but nevertheless bothered me. All the time I knew her, Elsbeth weighed between 139 and 141 pounds. That is, until the last few months, when it dropped to 134 or 135. At 140, she looked better. Another thing that was causing turmoil in my mind was Elsbeth's seeming reluctance to start a family. When we got married, she was definitely ready for at least a couple of beloved babies, but it was a question of when, and I knew that first pregnancies after 40 usually weren't so easy. While I was driving, I decided to make her say when within a few days of her returning from her trip. Most of the other things that were on my mind were important to me, but not to this story, so I won't bore you with them. However, another important thing was that I did not want to miss such a beautiful day. I had not gone hiking for a long time, and I thought that a solo hike would be as useful to me as Elsbeth was to her trip to see her sisters. It was then that I decided to go hiking in the nearby mountains. Rangers recently warned residents not to walk on certain trails, especially women, because several incidents, including rape, have occurred and a serial offender has yet to be caught. However, I'm too big, strong, and stupid to be afraid. I haven't been afraid of anything physical since I was 12, so it didn't mean anything to me. My house is 30 miles from a challenging mountain trail I wanted to hike, so I stopped, loaded my backpack with food and 3 insulated metal bottles of ice water, a spare t-shirt and long-sleeve shirt, a knife, a flashlight, and a few other things. Little things, although I intended to return home before dark. I strapped on my hiking boots, tossed my backpack on the passenger seat, and drove to the trailhead. There were fewer cars in the parking lot than there usually are on a Saturday morning in early fall, perhaps because of warnings about a serial rapist. Be that as it may, I set off at a brisk pace, enjoying the peace and quiet, disturbed only by the singing of birds and the light breeze rustling through the treetops, as well as the magnificent scenery. After walking a few miles, I stopped for about 20 minutes to eat a few energy bars and drink a liter of water, still ice cold, and then continued on. Instead of staying on the main trail, I turned onto a rarely used spur that ended in a cliff about 2 kilometers away and walked briskly forward. It was about 15 minutes into my lunch stop when I heard muffled sounds of distress coming from my right. Always being both curious and not brain enough to be afraid, I quickly walked in the direction of the sounds. Not more than 50 meters from the path, I saw 2 bodies on the ground. The man lying on top with a knife was apparently threatening the naked woman lying below. I didn't hesitate for a second. Throwing off my backpack as I ran into the guy before he saw me. He had just begun to turn his head in response to the sound of a 230-pound bull rushing through the underbrush when I kicked him in the right temple. I think my foot hit hard enough that if it had been a soccer ball, I could have scored from 60 yards. In any case, he flew away from the woman and lay motionless a few yards away from her. I was about to trample him when I saw that he had passed out, and since his knife was out of reach, I turned my attention to his victim. The topless woman looked scared to death. Her jean shorts were unbuttoned but not removed, and leaves were tangled in her hair. Once again, making sure that the rapist was not moving, I took care of her. I extended my hand to her. "Are you okay?" I approached the rapist and noticed that he matched the physical description of a serial rapist that other victims had given to authorities. I made sure once again that the knife was out of his reach. Then I knelt down and felt his pulse. He was definitely dead. Then I had to decide what to do, besides helping his victim get out of the forest. I approached her. I didn't introduce myself. "I'm Blake." "And who are you?" "Rachel." "Rachel Webb," she replied, shaking my outstretched hand. "Well, Rachel, the attacker is dead. Apparently, I fatally kicked him. Now we need to decide what to do. Ultimately, I'll do what you want. But let me give my initial thoughts, and then you have your say, okay?" "Of course," she said, and then added with a stern expression, "I'm glad he's dead." "Me too, because I'm sure he's a serial rapist." This seemed to make Rachel's eyebrows rise. Then I continued, "I would prefer if we just left it like this." I wiped away any traces of my DNA from it after taking the pulse, and there is no other sign that I touched it because I only touched it with the toe of my shoe. I'm worried it might have your DNA on it. "How did he touch you?" Rachel was a little hesitant to answer, but eventually answered. But she was traumatized, so she couldn't tell me much. I decided that we needed to do something with the body, but without Rachel or me being involved. After a few minutes of thinking and exchanging ideas, I said, "Let me look around." I walked away from the crime scene in the opposite direction of the path, and after about 100 meters, I came to a rock ledge. From the rock outcropping to the fairly deep stream below was about 40 feet. If I had thrown the rapist off the cliff into the creek, any trace of Rachel would probably have been gone within a couple of days. I went back to Rachel and told her my plan, and that I would need her top. Using it, I grabbed the rapist by the legs and dragged him to the ledge, then threw him face down into the stream. He hit it right in the center, where the stream was deep enough to completely cover his body, although he could be seen. Using her cut bra, Rachel picked up his knife and brought it to me. I threw the knife. It could have been washed downstream, but perhaps not since it landed upstream of the body. "Let me destroy your ruined clothes. Sounds tempting?" She answered meekly as I put the ruined bra and top into my backpack. When we returned to the crime scene, Rachel began to sob quietly. I sat her down on the rock again and held her until she stopped. She gently pulled away from me. "I'm fine now. Let's get out of here." When we reached the main trail, I slowed down to make sure there was no one else around before we followed it back to the trailhead. During our walk back, I struck up a casual conversation with her, hoping to distract her from her ordeal. She seemed to me to be a fairly stoic woman, and after about half an hour, she seemed to be behaving almost normally, although I thought she might need counseling in the future. I finally worked up the courage to ask why she was hiking alone when the ranger posted a warning about a serial rapist. "I'm from another city. I'm here on business and had to stay over the weekend, so I didn't know anything about the warning, and I love the outdoors. I think I should have been more careful anyway." "Don't beat yourself up," was my answer. "You should be able to walk along a path in the forest without fear. You didn't do anything wrong." We learned a lot about each other in the 2+ hours it took to get to the trailhead, including that she was 29 years old, about to turn 30, married with no children, and a business executive. When we got to the trailhead, her rental car was parked just 2 spaces away from mine, and I was again amazed that the parking lot was so empty on this beautiful early fall day. At the beginning of the trail, I hugged her shoulders again and looked intently. "Listen, Rachel, I suggest you go to a psychologist with whom you have a trusting relationship and talk about your experience. It may take some time to come to your senses, But in just over 3 hours that I've known you, I've learned that you're resilient and quite persistent. Thank you, Blake. You can't even imagine how much I appreciate this." And tears appeared in her eyes. "I know how much you appreciate it, Rachel, and I can say that it was an honor to help you. It was probably the best thing I've done in my life, and I'm glad to know I was helpful." Then, after a pause, I continued. "One thing, remember not to report this to the authorities. In 2 days, I will make an anonymous call from a payphone to the authorities and tell them where they can find the body of a serial rapist. I want the public to no longer be afraid, and during this time, all traces of us will be washed away from him." Rachel stared at me. The sun shone on her, and although I had long ago realized that she was a pleasant-looking woman, I had not realized until that moment that she was much more than just pleasant. She was exotic. "Where should I return your shirt, Blake?" "I'll have to keep it on until I get back to my hotel, but I'll happily return it." "Please keep it. If it brings back bad memories, then throw it away. But actually, you can use it whenever you want to wear something 6 sizes too big for you," I replied with a smile. "Okay," she smiled back. "Good luck, Rachel," I said, kissing the top of her head, and then turned and opened the door of my car. As soon as I got behind the wheel and buckled up, she knocked on the window. "I would like to invite you to dinner to thank you," she said with a smile. As I looked at her beautiful face and remembered the flawless mammary glands that were now protruding from under my shirt, I thought, too much temptation, so I politely declined, telling her that no further thanks were necessary and that I had other plans. Then she shocked me one last time. "What do you think about my breasts?" The way your eyes almost popped out of their sockets when you looked at her, it looked like you thought there was something wrong with her. I know, I instantly blushed. Before I could think of a decent answer, I blurted out, "She is definitely the cutest I've ever seen in my life." When I saw her devilish grin, I became even more embarrassed and left without further ado. I spent the next half hour kicking myself for being a pervert, for staring at her naked breasts, and for my answer to her question. Eventually, I realized I couldn't return either, so I sighed and just drove home, stopping only at the nearest convenience store to throw her ruined top and bra in the trash. That evening, I called Elsbeth, talked to her, both of her sisters and all 5 of their children, briefly with each, bought some takeout for dinner, and went to bed quite early. I was tired and immediately fell asleep. Unfortunately, I woke up in the middle of a deep sleep in a cold sweat, and the most surprising thing was that at that moment, I reached climax. "What the hell?" I groaned. The clock showed 3:08 a.m. I chastised myself for the plot of the most realistic dream of my life and eventually fell asleep again. The next day, Sunday, I was full of energy despite the interrupted night's sleep. I solved a few puzzles in the newspaper, cooked myself a hearty breakfast, did a vigorous weight training session, went on a 20-mile bike ride, and in the middle of the day, took a shower and dressed only in gym shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. I was going through some paperwork for work when my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I couldn't believe who the doorbell was, the same person who had figuratively ring my bell the night before, Rachel Webb. "Rachel," I greeted her in shock. "What are you doing here, and how did you know where I live?" "I knew where you lived because I had your license plate, and I have an employee who can find out anything. And she easily found it by the license plate, although you, I must add, were quite clever in never telling you. Tell me your last name. As for why I'm here, it's to return the shirt, to say thank you again, and for another reason, can I come in?" Actually, I didn't want to let Rachel in. The thin top she was wearing showed off wonders on her chest, and the shorts clearly showed off her toned legs. However, being a gentleman, I replied, "Of course. Sorry, please come in." I brought Rachel into the living room, and when I picked up my shirt, she said, "Sorry, I didn't have the opportunity to wash it at the hotel. She might have my scent on her," as if the presence of her scent was something negative. "No problem," I replied. "Would you like to drink something?" "Of course, but don't overdo it," she replied. "I was just about to grab a can of seltzer, Rachel." "I'm fine with that, Blake." While sipping seltzer, we first chatted about the weather, how she liked our city, the restaurants she'd eaten at in the past week, and other places to go outside of the ones we've been to. After she thanked me again, she said, "There is another reason to come." I looked at her questioningly. "I'm here for therapy." "Like this?" I asked, truly puzzled. I was afraid that I would have a nightmare at night. Instead, I had one of the most powerful and realistic, wonderful dreams I have ever had. "Really?" I exclaimed. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" I would have thought this was a good sign if it weren't for the fact that the dream made me think. It also made me realize that acting out my dream would provide real therapy, just as it did during the night. Last night, I looked up information on the internet about other victims of the trail rapist, as the press calls him. All of them were seriously injured and also raped, and one is still in hospital. You saved me from something that probably would have ruined my life, and that knowledge was very helpful. I was internally happy when she said this, but I didn't want to show it, so I just smiled and said, "I told you that I'm really glad to help." "Yes," she grinned. "In my dream, I remembered something else that you also said, that I have the most beautiful breasts you have ever seen." With that, Rachel stood up and walked over, pulling her top over her head, revealing the juicy delights of her breasts. She took off her top, sat on my lap, and said, "My dream was intense because I dreamed that you were caressing my breasts, poking your charms in my face. That is, before you had sex with me," she continued. "For the next 15 minutes or so, my mind was more foggy than any other time in my life. Most of all, I didn't want to change Elsbeth. Most of all, I wanted to caress Rachel's breasts and then have sex with her. Clearly, someone had to back down. I must be a really weak person, because after I had been fondling Rachel's breasts while holding them on my lap for about 10 minutes, I stood up, took off my shirt and shorts, and she had already pulled down her shorts. I picked her up and we moved to our soft, large sofa in the living room. After our quick first round, where we simultaneously peeked, I finally pulled away. She quickly turned around, kissed me hard on the lips, and then moaned, "Please take me to bed." "No problem," I growled. I picked her up, almost ran up the stairs, jumping 2 steps at a time, and laid her on the bed in the guest room. Rachel and I didn't get out of bed for over 2 hours. We ended up just washing off all the sweat and other bodily fluids in the shower, and then, still naked, we called our spouses. Surprisingly, both were impossible to contact. Elsbeth's sister Eleanor said mysteriously, "She's been away all day, and I don't know when she'll be back." "Just tell her I called Eleanor, and let me know if any of her plans change," I said politely, before asking her to hug her children for me, and ending the call. In Rachel's case, she simply said, "My husband John didn't respond, so I left him a nice voicemail and told him I'd be spending the rest of the evening with business associates." "You and I need to talk things over, don't we, Blake?" "Yes, we need to discuss how many climaxes we can have before tomorrow morning," I growled. "You know, I have to work tomorrow morning," she grinned. "Yes, but your job here tonight is to make sure I'm as sexually satisfied as I've ever been." By the time we fell asleep in each other's arms, I realized that if she was as good at her job as she was at satisfying me sexually, she was probably the best businesswoman in the state. Rachel checked out of her hotel room on Monday morning, putting all her clothes in her rental car, and, after her afternoon appointments, arrived at my house around 6 p.m. I gave her the remote control for our 3-car garage, so she drove into the empty space and carried her suitcases into my house and upstairs to the second guest bedroom, where we slept the night before. I returned home half an hour later, and she was in the kitchen wearing just an apron and high heels, preparing a pre-dinner snack. There was something about my connection with Rachel that overwhelmed me. It was more than just perfect breasts and other delights. It was something unearthly that I simply could not explain. She stayed overnight from Monday to Thursday. Before returning home on Tuesday, I drove to a rough part of town, changed clothes, walked 2 blocks from my car to a payphone where I was sure there were no cameras. I looked, and, wearing gloves, wiped my quarter clean, called authorities, and told them where they could find the body of a serial rapist, and then hung up. After my call, the news spread very quickly. Authorities apparently quickly located the body and conducted urgent DNA testing. On Thursday morning, every media outlet in the city, including a headline in the morning's leading newspaper, confirmed through DNA testing that the dead body found was that of a serial rapist. The whole town breathed a sigh of relief, and Rachel almost felt dizzy when she read the 2-page article in the newspaper. I took Rachel to the airport on Friday morning. After I kissed her goodbye, she said, "We both need a month to think it over. I've been floating somewhere in the clouds having sex with you for the last week. It will probably take me a month to figure this out. Then I'll call you." "Sounds like a plan," I replied, because I had nothing to add. Although it was the best sexual experience of my life, I also really needed time to think. I gave her another quick kiss on the lips, and she disappeared into the airport. Luckily, Elsbeth won't be home until Sunday afternoon, which will give me time to recover from a wild week of sex. When I met Elsbeth at the airport, she seemed rested and fit at the same time. From the moment I dropped Rachel off, I gradually began to feel guilty about my relationship with Rachel. I'd be a real asshole if I didn't feel guilty, but even when I felt really guilty, I knew I was still an asshole. I debated whether to tell her, but decided to wait until we just talked before making a final decision. That night, Elsbeth repeated her blow-up doll image when we had sex, but it didn't really bother me because I was fantasizing about having sex with Rachel. I think Elsbeth wondered why I paid more attention to her breasts than ever before, but she said nothing about it. When we kissed goodbye on Monday morning before work, we both made it clear that we needed to talk that evening. After we ate Chinese takeout that evening and put the dishes in the dishwasher, Elsbeth grabbed a glass of wine and a can of seltzer, and we sat on the porch to talk. She got straight to the point. "Blake, I have 2 things to tell you. I'm embarrassed about the first one and regret the second one, even though I had to do it. I don't want our marriage to end, but I'm afraid that what I did will make you end it." "Is this serious, Elsbeth?" "Yes, I think so, Blake," she sighed. Then, gathering her courage, she spoke. "I've been in a fog for the last few months because I had sex with another guy, twice. He just came to stay for a few days, and I will never see him again. But I had to tell you because I feel guilty. I don't love him, it was clearly a mistake, and he was nowhere near as much of a lover as you. I felt depressed, and you were out of town. I had sex with him in his hotel room 2 nights in a row. I attribute my recent weight loss to my worries about it." She looked at me with sad eyes. I just stared back. If it weren't for my connections with Rachel, I probably would have freaked out. Instead, I just kept the powder dry. I think Elsbeth was surprised that I didn't attack her. After a minute or so of delay, when the expected fireworks did not go off, I asked tensely, "What else?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I believe I can convince you to forgive me for what I just told you." I don't know if you can forgive what I'm going to tell you now, but I really had no choice. Over the past couple of years, the thought of having children has completely driven me crazy. I just can't do it, and to make sure you can't talk me into it, I had an outpatient procedure that will ensure I can't get pregnant. It was on this trip while I was visiting my sisters. Once again, I had a reaction that Elsbeth could never have predicted. The first thoughts that flashed through my head were, I wonder if Rachel will have my children. This thought really freaked me out. After I shook my head, a more traditional thought occurred to me, although with less anger than might have been expected. Well, how things turned out. It was today that I wanted to finally talk to you about the fact that the time has come to take care of the children. Otherwise, I decided, everything would be over between us. So, you answered my question. It's over between us. I'll file for divorce this week. Elsbeth began to cry inexplicably. Why are you crying? You should have known that this would be the end for us. I could survive your date, but I will not accept the refusal to have children after we always agreed that we would have them. I hoped against everything that this wouldn't happen, but combined with my betrayal, I can't blame you. Do you want me to find another place to live immediately? Or are you going to move out? Hell no. I'm not moving out immediately, and I'm not asking you to. Walking out the door in the morning without kissing her, I said, "Today I will meet with a divorce lawyer and ask him to draw up a statement of divorce due to irreconcilable differences." I did meet with a family law attorney and hired her to draft the divorce papers. Although I was sorely tempted to call Rachel almost every day in the month since I dropped her off at the airport, for some reason I didn't. I couldn't explain it to myself because I was getting a divorce and would like to see how my relationship with Rachel would turn out in the future. Deep down, I wanted her to make the first move. Almost 6 weeks after the breakup, Rachel called me on my cell phone. "Hello, Blake. Why didn't you call me?" "Hello, Rachel. I was waiting for your call. I wanted to make sure you were really interested in me before I talked to you. If you weren't 6'5" and strong as a gorilla, I would think you were a weakling." She chuckled. "You did it." I grinned in response. "Okay, since we're on the phone, I have to tell you something, Blake bastard." "Oh, and what is it, dear Rachel?" "You probably knocked me up that Sunday when you lured me to your house and then had sex with me all day, that's what." I was silent for a long time. She was silent on the other end of the line. "How do you know that you are pregnant?" "Yesterday I took a blood test, and this morning I vomited. That's how it is." "Are you sure it's from me?" "I just feel it. Also, my doctor says she timed it very well, and 6 weeks is right around when we first had sex. In any case, I can confirm this with a DNA test in just 8 weeks. Why didn't you take birth control?" "Because my previous doctor said that due to the structure of my uterus and fallopian tubes, the likelihood of me ever being able to get pregnant was very low. And for the last 2 years, I had sex with John without contraception and never got pregnant. And the birth control pills that I took for the first few years were contraindicated for me. They made me sick." "What are you going to do?" "I intend to convince you that our connection 6 weeks ago was real, that you want to be a full-time father to our child, and that we will have a wonderful life together." I was silent for some more time. Then she continued, "I can imagine that you forgot how good I look. I'm sending you an update to your iPhone right now. After you get this, call me if you want to remember what I feel like." My phone beeped a few seconds later. The photo sent was of a smiling, naked Rachel. I couldn't help but remember how good she looked. Then I remembered one of my dreams and called her back. "Did you like the photo?" That's how she answered the call. "You know what I want," I answered. "I have a question." "I have the answer," she grinned. "When you breastfeed your baby, will I still have access to your breasts?" "Only if I produce enough milk for both of you." "I've got one more question. When can I come?" "I told John I was divorcing him as soon as I found out I was pregnant. I'm moving into an apartment this weekend. You can help me move on Friday and then have sex with your baby's mother until Sunday." Where should I go? After this, events developed rapidly. Rachel was more interested in moving to my city than I was to hers, so 2 months after that call, we were living in a small house in the nearby suburbs. She left her job with a good recommendation to find a new one after giving birth. At 9 weeks, we had a DNA test done on our unborn baby girl, and it was no surprise to any of us that she was my daughter. My divorce took place 4 months later. Elsbeth cooperated. We split everything 50-50, including the sale of our house. We both had good incomes, so neither of us suffered economically. Rachel's husband was fighting a divorce until he was given a DNA test, after which there were no problems. They also split everything 50-50. We are now approaching our 10-year wedding anniversary and Rachel's 40th birthday. She and I have 3 children, a dog, and a rabbit. I'm as happy as a pig in shit. She is not at all worried about turning 40 and is looking forward to the party I will throw in her honor, which will be attended by our children and the children of all our adult guests. Even though she's breastfed 3 kids, Rachel still has the best breasts I've ever seen, and the day isn't complete without me giving her at least a few minutes of attention. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.